Sam stared at the blinking cursor on her laptop screen, the list of overdue bills filling the space like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. Rent, utilities, tuition, groceries. It was all piling up faster than she could handle. No matter how many hours she worked at the diner, or how many shifts she picked up at the library, it was never enough. The anxiety never let her rest, the looming threat of eviction a constant companion. What the hell am I gonna do? She glanced at her phone, hoping for a miracle. Maybe a message from her landlord saying she could have a few extra days to pay, or even some forgotten balance in her bank account. But no. Instead, there was just a message from an unknown number. I can help you. Do a few small favors for me, and your money problems will disappear. Sam's brow furrowed. She blinked at the screen, wondering if she was losing her mind from stress, or if this was some kind of cruel joke. She tossed the phone aside with a scoff, returning her attention to her laptop. But the message gnawed at her. She couldn't help but glance back at the phone, her curiosity and desperation winning out. The phone buzzed again. I'm serious. The first favor is easy. You won't regret it. Her heart skipped a beat, her fingers itching to type a response. But she hesitated. This could be a scam, or worse, something dangerous. She had heard stories about people being lured into shady deals or getting caught up in criminal activity. But if this was real, what if she really could get the money she needed? The bills on her laptop screen stared back at her like a taunt, reminding her of how trapped she was. She exhaled sharply and picked up her phone, typing a simple response. What do you want me to do? The reply came almost immediately. Pick up a package from 27th and Main. Deliver it to 54 Evergreen. No questions. 5,000 as soon as you do it. Sam stared at the message, her mouth suddenly dry. $5,000. For just delivering a package? That was too good to be true. But her hands were trembling now, the thought of that much money making her feel lightheaded. She could pay rent, cover her tuition, maybe even get some real food instead of living off ramen for another month. Before she could second-guess herself, Sam grabbed her jacket and bag, heading for the door. 27th and Main wasn't far from campus, but it was a part of town Sam rarely visited. The streets were lined with old, run-down shops, most of them closed, their windows dusty and covered in peeling flyers. She felt uneasy as she walked. The sun beginning to set, casting long shadows that made everything seem more sinister. She found the address easily enough, an old convenience store with a flickering neon sign. The place looked abandoned, but when she pushed open the door, a bell jingled, and a man appeared from behind the counter. He was tall, his face obscured by the shadow of his baseball cap, his expression unreadable. Here for the package? His voice was deep, monotone. Sam nodded, her heart racing. The man reached under the counter and pulled out a small black box, no bigger than a shoebox. It was plain, unmarked, and heavier than it looked when she took it. Deliver it to 54 Evergreen, the man said, his gaze lingering on her for a moment too long. And don't open it. Sam nodded again, clutching the box to her chest as she hurried out of the store. The walk to Evergreen felt like a blur. Sam's mind raced with questions. What was in the box? Who was this mysterious benefactor? Why was she even doing this? But every time she considered turning around, the thought of $5,000 anchored her in place. 54 Evergreen was a house at the end of a dead-end street. The lawn was overgrown, the windows dark. It looked like no one had lived there in years. Sam hesitated, feeling a chill crawl up her spine. But this was it. She'd come this far. All she had to do was drop off the package and leave. She approached the front door, her breath fogging in the cool evening air. There was no doorbell, just an old brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. She lifted it, hesitated for a second, then let it drop with a dull thud. The door swung open almost immediately. No one stood there. The house was dark, silent. Sam swallowed, stepping forward and placing the box just inside the doorway. As soon as it touched the floor, the door slammed shut, making her jump. Her pulse raced, but she didn't linger. She turned on her heel and hurried down the street, not looking back. Later that night, back in her small apartment, Sam lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed again, and she reached for it with trembling hands. Well done. The money is in your account. She opened her banking app, her heart pounding, and there it was. $5,000. Her mind reeled. This was real. It had actually happened. She had the money. She could breathe again. But as relief washed over her, so did something else. A deep unease, a feeling that she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The message from R blinked on her screen again. There will be more favors soon. Be ready. Sam's phone vibrated on the table, the screen flashing with a new message from R. She stared at it for a long moment, already knowing what it would say. It had been days since the last favor, days since the money hit her account, and with each passing hour, her anxiety grew. $5,000 had solved some of her immediate problems, but the feeling of being watched, of something closing in, never left. Finally, she picked up the phone and opened the message. Tonight is the last favor. If you do this, you'll never have to worry about money again. Meet me at 145 Blackridge at midnight. Follow these rules carefully. Don't leave until sunrise. When the bell rings at midnight, hide immediately. Never look into the mirrors. Keep every door shut, but if one opens on its own, don't close it. If you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around. Her breath caught in her throat as she read through the instructions. The absurdity of the rules made her want to laugh, but the seriousness of the message made it clear this wasn't a joke. R wasn't playing games. She closed her eyes, gripping her phone tightly. This was insane. But then she thought of her bank account, of the debt she was still buried under, the weight of her financial struggles squeezing the life out of her. The promise of never having to worry about money again sounded like a lifeline, one she couldn't afford to ignore. Sam threw on her jacket, grabbed her keys, and left her apartment, knowing that there was no turning back. 145 Blackridge stood at the edge of the city, an old mansion that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The windows were dark, and the front yard was overgrown with weeds. The place had an air of decay, the kind that made the hairs on the back of Sam's neck stand on end. She walked up the cracked stone steps, her fingers trembling as she reached for the doorknob. The door creaked open before she touched it, as if the house was inviting her inside. Stick to the rules, Sam. That's all you have to do, she told herself as she stepped into the darkness. The inside of the mansion was cold, far colder than the night outside. The air smelled of dust and rot, and her footsteps echoed eerily through the empty halls. She pulled her phone from her pocket, checking the time. 11:50 p.m. 10 minutes until midnight. She wandered through the house, trying to familiarize herself with the layout. The rooms were cluttered with old furniture covered in white sheets, like ghosts hiding from the past. And then there were the mirrors. They hung on nearly every wall, grand and ornate, reflecting the dim light from her phone screen. She avoided looking directly into them, recalling R's third rule. Each door she passed, she made sure to close it tightly behind her, her heart racing with every click of the latch. The house felt too quiet, too still, as if it was waiting for something. This is crazy, Sam thought, her mind spinning. I'm hiding from mirrors and slamming doors in an empty house. What am I doing here? Her phone buzzed in her hand, making her jump. Another message from R. It's almost time. The clock struck midnight. A low, resonant bell rang throughout the mansion, shaking the walls, filling every room with its ominous tone. Sam froze. The sound reverberated through her chest, and her heart pounded in time with the bell. The second rule rushed back into her mind. Hide immediately. Panic shot through her as she looked around for a place to hide. There was an old wardrobe in the corner of the room. She sprinted to it, her breathing ragged, and slid inside, closing the door just as the bell's echo faded. The darkness was suffocating, and the air in the wardrobe felt stale. She could hear her own heartbeat, thudding in her ears, and then footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere deep within the house. The sound was distant at first, but it grew louder, closer, with every passing second. Sam clamped her hand over her mouth, trying to steady her breathing. The footsteps reached the door of the room she was hiding in, pausing just outside. Her mind raced. Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't do anything. The door creaked open. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying the thing, whatever it was, wouldn't find her. The footsteps entered the room, slow and deliberate. Sam felt the floorboards creak under its weight. She couldn't see anything, but she felt the presence. Heavy, oppressive, lurking just outside the wardrobe. For a moment, the footsteps stopped. Silence filled the room. Then, the wardrobe door rattled gently, like something was testing it. Don't open it. Please don't open it. And then, the footsteps retreated, slowly, methodically. They faded into the distance, leaving Sam trembling in the darkness. She waited for what felt like hours before daring to open the wardrobe. When she finally stepped out, her legs were shaking, her breath shallow. The mansion was silent again, but the rules flashed through her mind like warnings on a broken record. Never look into the mirrors. Keep every door shut. Don't turn around. Sam moved cautiously through the mansion, avoiding the mirrors, her skin crawling with the feeling that something was always watching her. As she passed through the hallways, she closed every door behind her, just like R had instructed. But then, a door creaked open on its own, the old wood groaning as it swung wide. Sam stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her throat. If a door opens on its own, don't close it. She left it open, just as R had said. But every instinct screamed at her to run, to leave, to get out of this house. But the rules. She had to follow the rules. Hours passed in a blur of paranoia and terror. Sam kept moving, never lingering in one room for too long, always listening for the faintest sound of footsteps. But as dawn approached, something changed. She felt it first. The oppressive air thickened, and the mirrors, which she had avoided for hours, seemed to hum with energy. The footsteps returned, louder this time, faster. Something was coming for her, and it was no longer hiding in the shadows. Sam ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She darted through the halls, slamming doors behind her, her pulse racing as the footsteps followed her. Every turn seemed to lead her deeper into the house, the layout twisting like a maze. Suddenly, she found herself in a room filled with mirrors. She tried to avoid looking at them, but something caught her eye. In one of the mirrors, her reflection wasn't her own. It smiled at her. Her reflection stepped out of the mirror, its face twisted into a grotesque grin. It looked like her, but something was horribly wrong. Its eyes were hollow, black pits, its skin pale and stretched too tight over its bones. Sam turned and ran, but she heard the footsteps behind her. Closer, closer, and then, against every instinct she had, she turned around. The thing, her reflection, was right there, its hand reaching out toward her. Its cold fingers brushed her skin, and the world went dark. The next morning, the mansion was silent again. The air was still, the mirrors empty. Sam was gone. Her phone lay discarded on the floor, buzzing with a new message. Well done.